Welcome to the LowCarbUSA podcast, where we seek to inspire you to help us build this community. I'm Doug Reynolds.
And this is Pam Devine.
Today I have Dr. Karl Goldkamp with me, and he's a naturopathic doctor who's been a staunch supporter of ours at all our Florida events. I think he's been to every single one. And he's got an incredible story about he came to the low-carb lifestyle and how he's incorporating it now into a virtual or online practice. So he's here today to tell his story.
That's right. You don't know my story. Our story is easy to tell. All right. Basically, so I graduated from medical school last year. So I'm a naturopath in Seattle, 1998. Stayed on to finish my Chinese herbal medicine and then went to practice in Connecticut. I'm from New England. And practiced with a group, started our own practice in Old Lyme, doing really well. 2008 came, and we were so invested. We were doing so well before we bought a big building, and we remodeled it and everything. And 2008, it sucked all the air out of everything. We had other practitioners, and so for 4 years we struggled to eke out, even pay our building mortgage and so on for the longest time. Finally, in about 2012, it was catastrophic. 4 events happened. My mother died. My brother died of multiple myeloma after 9.5 years. He was my only brother, older than me. Judy, who you've met, she was diagnosed with a brain tumor the size of a small plum, lost the vision in one eye. She had to go in for brain surgery. We finally filed for bankruptcy for the practice. And after all that, my internal stress blew up, and I was diagnosed with the worst Crohn's and ulcerative colitis greater southern Connecticut had ever seen. So we had a problem. We were down and out, and how to come back from that. So that was 2012. I think you guys started, I can't remember when you guys started, but where I began, I became very anemic down to a hematocrit of 15, which is 3 cups of blood when you should have 9. So that's almost nothing. That means you lie down on the floor on your back. You have a resting heartbeat of over 140 minutes, over 100 beats per minute, 140 beats per minute. So I had to change some things. And it was, I can't believe I'm going to go out this way. I can't believe I'm just going to fade away and die. So we found another doc. I got blood transfusions for, and with that, we took out what money that wasn't obligated to go in bankruptcy, and I went to international conferences on gastroenterology. So I learned all about FMT, fecal microbiota transfer. Now they call it FT. And got to know people from Australia and Belgium, the top of the world. They were using it actually in Belgium for diabetes. Really interesting stuff. So I went in that direction for a while, and I started learning about, part of this, I buy this, I needed to really just, and that I did get some benefit. And meanwhile, Judy was healing from her post-surgery, major brain surgery of 12 hours, that there had to be something about above the gut that treats the gut, and what you eat determines, sort of obvious. And the science is so new on that too. They can't tell you what a healthy microbiome is. They can only tell you what a pathologic, what is a dysbiosis, when there is a certain species of bacteria or viruses that are overpopulating. Well, that they can identify. So it's really interesting. We've had all that. So coming into what's better, we got into bone broth. Anything. So bone broth then led me into other things, led me to the ketogenic diet. This is probably a year or two before the metabolic therapy conferences down in Tampa. And so I read all about that, read Jeff Volek's book. At the time, he was at UConn doing his first publication. So we were in Connecticut. I go, really? This is from UConn? This guy's up at UConn? Of course, he didn't stay at UConn much. I talked to him later at the metabolic therapy conference, and he's glad he left. And so just reading everything I could, because I think this is something that could help us. But it wasn't etched in stone then. It wasn't as it is now. It's not black or white. So went down. I knew Ellen Davis, who got me into the metabolic therapy conference. There's only 60 people that first conference. Second year, there was 200. And after that, they don't even do it in Tampa anymore. They got bought out. So you came in on the second year of the metabolic therapy conference over on the other side of Florida. So when we attended you, you were starting from a different place of some of the same speakers, but a little more grassroots. And so now it was like, so who has received benefit and who's willing to talk about it? So I can almost name the speakers then. And it was generalized. The next year was even more focused. You know, the speakers then were more acquainted with blood work, more clinical, and and so they had their data. So now you have people bringing up their data plus their story. So this tended to overlap with me a lot. You know, it's like, wow, I can understand now that, you know, the labs were not anything strange. And so it's funny, we were already doing the HIT, but not from Dr. Ben's, from Dr. McGuff's The Body by Science, but it got refined. We're talking to Dr. Ben, speaking of later speakers. But these pieces started to come together, you know, saying, so what can we do? You know, what can Judy do not to get another brain tumor or to reduce what she has? So clearly it was appropriate, even though there's no data there. You know, there's no data for a meningioma and keto. You know, we're willing to accept that. You know, when you're going something new, don't look for the whole thing to be paved. You know, that's not going to happen for 20 years. So, but it was very exciting when you started to nuance, you know, even the anecdotal or connect with some of the speakers. You know, they'll point you in something, another direction. But once you let that go and you're just after anybody who's had some success, and then of course we started working with ourselves. So that's pretty much how this came together. With yours, I am almost being spoon-fed because it's covered some of what I knew, but now it's coming into, you know, those first 4 more years of keto, the metabolic therapy conferences, certain things that were thought that were true are no longer really true. That was in the world of exogenous ketones, and that's going to save the world. Well, it will if you have, if you're an older person or have a neurological disorder and you just need ketones. You know, Tom Segfried will say that, and others will say that, certainly Stephen Kinane. And but for the average person, ketones get in the way of losing weight. And most people come to keto, low carb, high fat, to lose weight. So that was a non sequitur. You know, that was clearly don't go there. You know, that's been documented. So there's a few of those, hey, isn't it wonderful? Now it's, no, actually, it's much broader than you ever thought possible. You know, you can almost, it's hard to think which wouldn't apply, but now, certainly for my gut, you know, how many colonoscopies later, there is not even a residual sign. And so it's like, I'm now leaner than I've been in probably 20 years, certainly healthier. And it's like, you know, it's became a bigger story. It wasn't just heal the gut, go find out, go apply. It is way beyond that. It's invigoration, it's restoration across the board.
Yeah, and I feel like you touched on it here, is that most people, even still today, are still coming to the ketogenic diet or the low carb, some form of low carb diet with the idea of weight loss in mind.
Right.
And what actually happens is that they become metabolically healthy, and as a side effect, they normalize their weight.
Right.
And you mentioned when we were in the preamble before when we were chatting about Dr. Robert Sivas, who has been at the last couple of these Florida events, but it was in fact, it was probably one of the first ones, and he was there talking to me about, at that point, becoming a speaker at future events. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you remember him. He was up. He came up and asked a bunch of questions all the time, but he wasn't actually a speaker.
Yeah,
we were standing outside the room waiting for them to open up to go into dinner the one evening, and he said to me, "Doug, you know, no one ever died from being fat." And he's a bariatric surgeon, right? So
right. Yeah.
About obesity, and he said no one died or dies from being fat. He said they die from the underlying metabolic issues that caused them to put on that weight.
Yep.
And so he focuses completely in his treatment of people in terms of addressing your metabolic health.
Right.
It's really hard to tell people because it's like foremost in most people's minds, but don't focus or don't stress about the weight. That will come in time.
Right.
Focus on getting healthy, because that is the most important thing. So
That's true. It's hard to take their eyes off of that when somebody's 100 pounds over that and they go, you know, this is the biggest social obstacle in health. I mean, they think it's more social, which is more important for them than their health. And not everybody is educated on what metabolic health is. You know, so your audience, by the way, has changed a lot as well. You have a pretty well-educated audience now. And initially it was about Mercola, and they weren't as educated. And so the questions that come up, the therapists are there, the physicians that are in the audience, those are pretty right-on questions. And so, so back to the person who's overweight, you have to sort of say, we're taking care of this, but this is how we're doing it. We got to look at some other things. And so it's a little bit like saying, you know, kind of back to the addiction thing, is like, we're not going to look at weight gain, but this is what we're implementing is, you know, low carb, high fat, and looking at some perhaps factors that are in your way, your obstacles. I agree. It takes a while for people to come there, you know, and there's a lot of, many are called, few are chosen. A lot of people come with, I won't say too high expectations, but as a rather superficial understanding of what can happen and what it takes to make happen. Mm-hmm. And once they get a little adapted to the amount of effort and the effort may be only in conceptually understanding the difference and not so much the implementation. So that therein is the shift.
You're a naturopathic doctor by training, right?
Yep.
But you're no longer actually practicing that way, but you're still working a lot with this stuff. So maybe just describe what it is that you're doing right now.
Okay. So I no longer want a bricks and mortar practice.
Okay.
The outlay for that we lost that outlay, and I don't want to go back there. You know, even on the malpractice, boy, all that stuff. So we've been, the world has changed also, obviously the internet, but I can order blood work for anybody in the contiguous United States through a Quest affiliate called Alta. And so we can work with that. Zoom allows me to talk to anybody, but I'm trying to, so in addition to quote unquote coaching, which is basically going through blood work and everything else, I'm still doing what I did then and touching them kind of indirectly, but finding ways of having them, you know, understanding their labs and some of these other special things that I look into, so they get the aha of this is actually a pretty easy thing for me to go forward. So what I'm doing is coaching, developing courses, developing a program, because I'd like to automate the things that drive me crazy and repeating, and simply have that something they can look at. And then you do have to go through some of their blood work, and behind all this is, you know, what they do every day is low carb, high fat at these other levels. So basically making courses, and I find much more rewarding, because if people have to pay, they pay attention. And so you're getting a different kind of person sitting in front of you. Whereas before, if it was covered by insurance, they would come. And kind of like with Dr. Westman, maybe it's the insurance that accounts for so much lack of compliance. It's somebody else paid for it.
Right.
They see it.
There's no skin in the game, right?
There's no skin in the game. Absolutely. So that's what I'm doing, and I like it, because the world's flat, and I don't know where I'd be able to order blood work in Argentina, but certainly it works in the United States.
But you actively working with and coaching patients who are trying to understand their metabolic health and trying to improve it by addressing it with this lifestyle.
Oh, absolutely.
All right. So I'll try and put it in the notes as well, but you're one of the early adopters, I suppose. You're one of the first people that we actually certified on our list of providers.
Yeah.
So if people want to look for you, just go into our list of providers and search for Dr. Karl Goldkamp, and or put in the zip code. What's the zip code there? It's
28560.
28560. So if you search either of those within our medical practitioners provider list, you'll be able to find him, contact him, and work with him remotely, because I know that's one of the big problems at the moment, is that people are struggling to find a doctor that is open to the conversation at the very least, you know.
I agree. Here's how I think this sort of plays out, because we just moved from Cape Cod, Mass, to New Bern, and so because we had some friends in the area, and so I think that, you know, I don't want a bricks and mortar, as I say, because of all the expense and so on and so forth. However, I feel a little that it behooves me to some extent of developing, in the very least, a meetup, you know, a keto meetup, because there's a lot of conversations that can be had that don't have to be that complicated, and people can just get going. And that sort of serves that particular hands-on. And so I think this getting a map of all these different meetups across the country is another way of making this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we did that, well, just started promoting more the local one we've kind of got going in San Diego. It's actually not I just kind of go, and it's actually Doc Brian Lenskers and Jeff Cotterman and that actually put it together.
Nice.
But the idea is that we'd love that to spring up all over the place.
Yep. So I would say it's like it's such a good fit, because it just allows basic conversations without getting too technical. And look at LowCarbUSA. It's a lot of these talks are pretty sophisticated.
Yeah.
You know, you start with, hey, this is the big picture, and then it goes to, wow, I didn't know that. It goes way off in a direction that you need a little education to understand, or ask the questions.
Right.
And that's how it goes with most of us.
Yeah. Anyway, we're trying to focus more and more with this podcast on doctors and patients who have had success with this. Because I think that's what people relate to, you know. At the end of the day, as you mentioned, like, we've got these incredibly sometimes famous speakers up on the stage, and scientists and doctors that are telling you about the scientific reasons why this is the right. But what people really relate to is somebody just like them, that has had success, and they can look at it and say, hey, that's me. I can do this. And, you know, and that all goes back to our efforts in trying to develop a community and trying to help the community to do this and be successful at it. So you are, and it's coming to bear fruit. It's a big deal. You know? Yeah. Awesome. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome, Doug. Take care.
Okay, cheers. You too.
Bye-bye.
So you'll notice that we haven't had any commercials at all during this podcast, and we intend to keep it like that if we possibly can. But at the same time, the work that we're doing and the efforts that we're going to get the clinical guidelines done, there's just so much to do. And in order to really, for this to be sustainable, we need your help. And so what we're asking you to do is go and take a look at our Patreon account. There's actually quite a few options there. It provides you with options to actually go onto our site, and there's membership options there where you can get access to all our video content and other perks of being a member, or even just, you know, $1 a month, become a patron. And you can find that in patreon.com/LowCarbUSA. I'll put it in the show notes and in the episode notes so that you can find it. And help us to change the world.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people take a look at the conference registrations, and I think they immediately assume that, you know, from a distance, that these might be money-making endeavors that we're doing with these conferences. And you know, it's hard to admit, and it's hard to tell people that we really aren't making any money from these. All 11 of the events that we've done have not been a profitable endeavor. We've literally had to dip into our credit, basically. It wasn't anything. It wasn't like we actually had a pocket to dip into and put money into. We've had to take loans and get a lot of credit for these events. So any little bit that you can help, every ticket that's sold, every little bit of $1 a month in a Patreon account will help us to fund our endeavors and fund the programs so that we continue to do some of these other things that are free content the project management that we're doing on the clinical guidelines will really go a long way.